Greetings. We are delighted to welcome you to this latest talk in our Iranian Studies Initiative series in collaboration with the University of California, Santa Barbara. I am Alireza Ardekani, Executive Director of Farhang Foundation here in Los Angeles. We are a member-supported, non-political, non-religious, not-for-profit organization with the sole mission to celebrate and promote Iranian art and culture for the benefit of the community at large. Today, we are delighted to welcome our special guest speaker, Dr. Teoman Aktan, who is joining us directly from Istanbul for the role of critical literature in reflecting the socio-political issues of the Qajar and Caucasus. This series is co-organized by the Graduate Center for Literary Research at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and with the support of the Geramian Emrani Foundation and the Duncan and Susan Mellencamp Funds. Now it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Janet Afari, the Director of the Iranian Studies Initiative at the University of California, Santa Barbara.
Thank you very much, Alireza. Hello, I'd like to welcome everyone to our fifth talk in our lecture series this year in collaboration with our partner Farhang Foundation. Our focus this year has been on the artistic and literary exchanges between Iran, South Caucasus, Central Asia, and Russia in the 20th century. Our speaker today is Dr. Teoman Aktan. He obtained his PhD in political science from the University of Istanbul. Currently, he's working with the Istanbul Center for Behavior Research and Therapy, the Human Rights Foundation of Turkey, the United Nations, and the Human Resource Development Foundation. Following his talk, Dr. Shiva Balaghi will be moderating the Q&A. Dr. Balaghi is a cultural historian whose research focuses on the visual culture of the modern Middle East and with an emphasis actually on the Qajar era. She's the academic coordinator of the Area Global Initiative at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Please use the Q&A button below your screen to send your questions. I hope you join us for the remainder of the lecture series this year. We'll take a pause for Nowruz. The next lecture will be on May 21st, and our speaker will be Dr. Giorgio Papashvili from the Tbilisi State Academy of the Arts.
Thank you for having me. First of all, I would like to thank the Farhang Foundation and Professor Janet Afari for their support for giving me this opportunity. Focusing on a common culture is one of the most urgent needs of our region. I would like to thank everyone who contributed to the preparation of this discussion environment. My talk today is on the role of critical literature in reflecting the socio-political issues of Iran and the Caucasus. As you know, criticism and critical thinking in any society is influenced by the intellectual and cultural developments of the society. The common features of pre-modern Muslim societies was fatalism and irrationality. The absence of critical thinking in Muslim societies has left the field of thought barren. The world of art and literature, which is affected by the spiritual and intellectual conditions of the society, is also greatly affected by such an atmosphere. However, since the beginning of the 19th century, there has been a major break in this cycle due to the political and economic developments in Qajar and the Caucasus. The separation of the Caucasus from the Qajar geography made it easier for the Caucasian intellectuals to move away from the dominant traditions of the Muslim society. Caucasian intellectuals who witnessed Russia's effort to compete with the Western world began to follow the South-Western intellectuals through Russia. This acquaintance process has evolved into questioning the social and political order and authoring it in the future. In the 19th century, radical changes occurred in the region. The Qajar government was trying to defend itself against Russia's expansionist policies. but the situation for the Caucasus was somewhat different. After the Caucasus geography was included in the political and administrative structure of Russia, it faced new administrative political realities and was in an effort to cope with the new challenges. The Tsarist policy was moving in a different direction. The Tsarist government was trying to consolidate its position in the Caucasus on the one hand and to create a new wave of influence on Qajar and Ottoman Empire on the other hand. The Eastern question has become one of the instruments used by Russian government to achieve this goal. On the one hand, Russia had to prepare the officials to be appointed to the East, and on the other hand, it had to consolidate its hegemony in the newly conquered lands. For this reason, academic and scientific research on Eastern culture has gained importance, and these necessities lead to the strengthening of Orientalist studies in Russia. During this period, important works on the culture of the region began to be published. Departments on the languages, literature, and history of the peoples of the East began to open in various universities of Russia. St. Petersburg and Kazan universities were centers that made great contributions to the development of Russian Orientalism. In this period, intellectuals such as Abbasquli Ağabakhanov, Mirza Alakbar Topchubashov, and Mirza Kazım Bey played an important role in the development of Oriental studies in Russia. Mirza Kazım Bey is one of the scholars who contributed to the development of critical thinking and scientific studies in the fields of history and literature in Russia. Mirza Kazım Bey, who has been the head of Kazan University's Department of Arabic and Farsi languages since 1845, increased his interest in the story of Persia and Arabic literature. While living in Petersburg, Mirza Kazım Bey published Muridism and Shamil, Muslim laws, and Bab and Babis. Mirza Kazım Bey, who prepared textbooks on the history of Iranian literature for Russian universities, turned his attention to the literature of Iran. However, his work was not limited to the literature and focused in Iranian politics. He supported Mirza Fatali Ahundov's struggle to create a new alphabet. In Mirza Kazım Bey's view, the Iranian people are under the pressure of the despotism of the Shahs and the bigotry of the clergy. He wrote Bab and Babis between 1854 and 1862, and at the time, interest in learning about the Babi movement increased in Russia and Europe. The work was first published in Petersburg in 1865, which made Mirza Kazım Bey the first researcher in the Babi movement in Russia. The work was translated into European languages in a short time. Mirza Kazım Bey uses the expressions ignorant, fanatic, and bigoted above the masses in his first works in the field of history. However, while describing the social events in 1860s, he moved away from his earlier views and stated that the social movements in the East and Europe tended towards the abolition of the old social order, even though they were formed on a religious basis. Before writing Bab and Babis, Mirza Kazım Bey went to Iran, visited Tabriz and Mazandaran, met personally with the participants of the Babis movement. Mirza Kazım Bey was of the opinion that the Babis movement targets the despotism and fanaticism that has existed for centuries in Iran. It's understood from his statements that Babis struggled not only for religious but also for socio-political reforms in Qajar geography. Mirza Kazım Bey compared this movement to the revolts of Stepan Razin and Yemelyan Pugachev in Russia. Mirza Kazım Bey had and emphasize on the political nature of Babi movement. In his view, the main goal of this movement was to end the arbitrariness of the government, to stop bribery and corruption, improve the judicial system, to stop the interference of the clergy in social life, to ensure that all are equal before law. According to him, this movement significantly reduced the authority of the clergy in Qajar. He believed that the Babis movement would set an example for social opposition in the following periods, and that these movements would lead the development of Qajar politics. Another important figure in critical south in Caucasus was Mirza Shafi Balaghi. He was born in Ganja. He learned Persian and Arabic at the madrasa where he started his education. In 1826, during the Russia-Qajar War, he fled to Iran. After Mirza Shafi returned to Ganja, he tried to make his living by giving private lessons. In the 1830s, he began to draw attention with his poems written in Farsi and Turkish. In 1832, while teaching calligraphy and poetry to Mirza Fatali Akhundov in Ganja, he directed him to modern education. He left Ganja in 1840 and went to Tbilisi. And there, with the help of Akhundzadeh, he was appointed as a teacher to the Kazai school. Mirza Shafi established relations with a wide range of Russian, Georgian, Armenian, and some European intellectuals in Tbilisi. Balaghi opposed the existing established order by addressing social problems in his poems. With a humorous style in his poems, he speaks of the mullahs' abuse of the religious feelings of the people, the tyranny of the rulers, ignorance, oppression of women, and superstitions as the major social problems of his time. Seeing the veil on the woman's face as a veil of darkness, Balaghi invites women to get rid of this dark veil, to be brave in life, and to live proudly. Another important figure for critical South in Caucasus and in Qajar Empire was Mirza Fatali Akhundzadeh. Akhundzadeh is one of the most important figures of the 19th century Azerbaijani literature. Akhundov is considered the founder of modern literature in Azerbaijan and the first Conde writer of the Islamic world. He was also the first alphabet reformer of the Islamic world. He was acquainted with the works of Voltaire, Montesquieu, David Hume, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, John Stuart Mill, Henry Thomas Buckle, and Ernest Renan. He became familiar with the works of Russian intellectuals such as Pushkin, Lermontov, and Marlinsky. The gap between East and West, ideal of good society, traditions, public education, critique, rule of law, civilization was topics that Akhundov tried to focus on them. Akhundov realized that the gap between East and West would widen day by day and came up with various ideas for overcoming the backwardness of Islamic society. Most of protagonists of Akhundov's plays fighting against old views and traditions, superstitions, traditional values, and corruption. Akhundzadeh advocated that all members of the society should be educated and have knowledge for the realization of social change. In his letter to Mirza Malcolm, mentioned the importance of public education. According to Akhundzadeh, without exception, all of the society should learn to read and write and have knowledge. According to Akhundzadeh, justice and elimination of oppression can only be achieved with the knowledge and unity of nation. In 1857, Akhundzadeh wrote a treatise on the necessity of changing the alphabet for the For the first time in the Islamic world, Akhundzadeh thought that it was religious fanaticism that prevented the new alphabet and the passive civilization in the nation of Islam. Therefore, he wrote Kemalet to prove that an Islamic Protestantism was necessary. The letter of Kemalet is not a sermon or advice, but a critique. According to Akhundzadeh, many philosophers who followed this method, such as Voltaire and Henry Thomas Buckle, addressed the public with their open criticism and made important contributions to the civilization of Europe. In Akhundzadeh's political self, the rule of law and the separation of religion from politics are very prominent. For this reason, he condemns the attempt to use the Sharia, even with good intentions, in politics. While criticizing Mirza Yusuf's one work, he rejected his idea that justice can be achieved through Sharia. According to Akhundzadeh, we must first look at whether Sharia is the source of justice or not. He tried to explain a number of foreign terms that he found important, such as political Protestantism, liberal, pension, charlatan, parliament, despot, civilization, literature, fanatic, philosophers, revolution, progress, changement, sudden change, patriot. Most important work of Akhundzadeh is Fenni Kritika, Art of Criticism. Akhundzadeh defines Kritika as the basic element of his thought system. Referring to John Stuart Mill, Akhundzadeh argued that freedom of thought and expression are fundamental rights and progress, and its resultant civilization cannot occur without freedom. He sees criticism as a precondition for freedom of thought. Akhundzadeh also advocated the freedom of women, equal rights for men and women, and the abolition of polygamy. Now, let us to look at the economic situation of Caucasus and Qajar geography at that period. The economic developments in the Caucasus have been decisive in the spread of radical ideas among different layers of society. The confrontation of the economies of Iran and the Caucasus with the capitalist economy had different consequences on the economies of these two regions. The edict of the Tsar regime that abolished serfdom in 1870 and the long-term lease of oil fields in the imperial lands in 1872 affected the social structure deeply in Caucasus. The abolition of serfdom was a heavy blow to the feudal order. With the flow of foreign capital, large-scale socio-economic and political changes have occurred in Caucasus. At the beginning of the 20th century, Baku transformed into an oil and industrial city and gained a decisive position in the world economy. These developments accelerated social changes in the Caucasus. However, Iran's inclusion in the world economic system had several consequences. One of the consequences of the confrontation between the Iranian economy and the capitalist economy was the creation of a crisis in the traditional Iranian economy, especially in the agricultural and handicraft sectors, which led to the widespread unemployment of the labor force working in these two sectors. Unemployed people from these two sectors of the Iranian economy migrated extensively to neighboring countries. The most important destinations for these immigrants were southern Russia and the Caucasus. These immigrants were mostly unskilled workers. Iranian immigrants in the Caucasus were not in a good situation, and most of these migrants worked for their Caucasian employers on the lowest wages. The presence of large numbers of Iranian immigrants in the important Caucasus cities such as Baku, Tbilisi, and Yerevan, and their harsh living conditions, along with exploitation of them by Caucasian employers and oppression of Iranian government agents, made life very difficult for Iranians in the Caucasus. This unfavorable situation paved the way for Iranian immigrants to turn to the revolutionary social democratic organization in Caucasus. The issues of Iranian immigrants found wide coverage in the press of that period. With the expansion of the local press and the support of local bourgeoisie for progressive ideas, the scope of critical thinking expanded and involved a wide range of educated people in Azerbaijan in intellectual debates. The involvement of the young generation of the Caucasus in political and revolutionary activities widened the scope of the Enlightenment in the Caucasus. The critical thinking of the first generation of Azerbaijani intellectuals paved the way for the emergence of a new generation of intellectuals such as Nasib Bey Ağayev, Hashim Bey Ağayev, Abdurrahim Bey Hakverdiyev, Sultan Mecid Gholizadeh, Neriman Nerimanov, Süleyman Bey Ahundov, Jalil Mohammad Gholizadeh, and others. Hasan Bey Zardabi, who published Akinci newspaper, was the founder of the local press in Azerbaijan. Akinci published from July 22, 1875 to September 29, 1877. And after that, Zia and Kashpul newspaper magazine started to be published. One of the most important and groundbreaking publications in the story of Azerbaijani press is the Mulla Nasreddin magazine. The political environment created by the 1905 revolution prepared the ground for the publication of many magazines and newspapers in Caucasus. Mulla Nasreddin magazine, like many other magazines, was product of this environment and also was an effort to the translator of the social, political, cultural, and economic demands of its time. Mulla Nasreddin was published in Tbilisi on the eve of Iranian constitutional revolution, and during the revolution, it reflected the news and developments with the journalists it had in Iran. Muhammad Said Ordubadi, along with Mirza Alakbar Mohammad Gholizadeh, Mirza Jalil's brother, were Mulla Nasreddin's reporters in Iran, and reporting on the constitutional revolution and events that occurred in that period. Mulla Nasreddin's influence in the political climate of Azerbaijan and Iran was such that Crown Prince Mohammad Ali Mirza ordered the publication to be banned from entering Iran, but was allowed with the protest of Tabriz Anjuman and National Parliament. In addition to the political atmosphere in Iran, Mulla Nasreddin had a lasting influence on some important periodicals such as Suri Safil, Nasim Shumal, and Azerbaijan, as well as on some writers and poets of the constitutional period such as Ali Akbar Dekhuda and Sayyid Ashrafuddin Gilani. The editors, writers, and cartoonists of Mulla Nasreddin paid attention to the developments in Iran due to the policy of magazine in supporting the political movements of the Islamic countries, the widespread presence of Iranian immigrants in the Caucasus, and the ethnic ties of some Mulla Nasreddin writers with Iran. After the Caucasus, Mulla Nasreddin had the largest audience in Iran. Mohammad Gholizadeh writes in one of the issues of magazine entitled "On Conditions of Our Magazine," more than 50,000 copies of our magazine are sent to Khorasan, Tehran, Isfahan, Tabriz, and even villages of Iran. Of this number, 13,690 are our subscribers, and the rest are sold to non-subscribers. The widespread presence of Iranian in the Caucasus and the connection of the intellectuals of that region with the Iranian intellectuals in Azerbaijan provided the ground for the transfer of magazine to Iran. And when the Iranians' interest in the magazine increased, Mullah Nasreddin focused more on Iranian developments. Ahmet Gholizadeh had gathered a group of prominent intellectuals, writers, and poets of the Caucasus in Mullah Nasreddin magazine. Sabir, Ali Nazmi, Hajibeyov, Ömer Farhang, Namenzadeh, Salman Mumtaz, and Inel Sultanov belonged to a group of writers and poets of Mullah Nasreddin magazine who had liberal and democratic tendencies. Another group of Mullah Nasreddin's writers were socialists such as Nariman Narimanov, Samed Ağa, Ağa Malioğlu, Ali Haydar Garayev, Muhammad Yarov, and Gazanfer Musabeyev, each of whom played a role in the various periods of Mullah Nasreddin's publication. Jalil Mohammad Gholizadeh was the mediator of different tendencies in the magazine. Mullah Nasreddin published 370 in Tbilisi, 8 issues in Tabriz, and 398 issues in Baku during the Soviet period. During 25 years of its publication, the magazine suspended twice due to financial problems and the outbreak of World War I, and was banned 3 times for its articles and cartoons. Under the influence of Mullah Nasreddin, a number of satirical and humorous magazines began to be published in the Caucasus, Central Asia, Volga, Iran, Dagestan, and other regions. Another topic that increased the popularity of magazine was the cartoons published by the magazine. The cartoons of the magazine belonged to 2 famous German artists in Tbilisi, Oskar Schmerling and Joseph Rotter, and later to Azim Azimzadeh. Said Ali Behzad drew the cartoons of 8 issues of Mullah Nasreddin that were published in Tabriz. The most important figure in Mullah Nasreddin for Caucasian readers and Iranian readers was Mirza Alakbar Sabir, who joined the magazine with his poems from the 4th issue. Mirza Alakbar Sabir published his first poems in the Sharq Rus newspaper, but acquired his fame with Mullah Nasreddin. His poems played an important role in the popularity of Mullah Nasreddin, especially in Iran. The tyranny and backwardness of the East against the West was the main subject of the magazine. According to Mirza Jalil, the magazine's subject was thousands of insects that kept people blind and deaf in ignorance. The journal aimed at a broad social awakening against the ignorance surrounding the Islamic world. For the writers of the magazine, the ruling group, clergy, and their supporters were circles that spreading ignorance among society. Women, children, workers, farmers were also victims of this order, and the magazine has chosen to be their voice. Mullah Nasreddin, who tries to wake up sleeping Muslims in the cartoon on the cover of the first issue, says, "I came for you, my Muslim brothers." This cartoon shows what was the mission of the magazine. Mullah Nasreddin magazine closely followed the Qajar and Ottoman revolutions, and therefore important events related to the political events of those countries found wide coverage in the magazine. From the first issue of Mullah Nasreddin's magazine, developments in Iran have been published in the form of reports, headlines, articles, cartoons, and stories. Tehran, Tabriz, Karadağ, Marağa, Maren, Julfa, Şebistar, Erdebil, Astara, Nemin, Urmiya, Khoy, Salmas, Mako, Gilan, Kazvin, Mashhad, Isfahan, and Bushehr are the cities mentioned in the magazine. Mullah Nasreddin, rather than giving the news, tried to draw attention to the pathology of the Iranian constitutional revolution and the approach of the lower sections of the society to it. The constitution has only one meaning in the world. It means that the deputies of the country gather in one place and make new laws, and the nation is obliged to comply with these laws. I expect orders to pay attention towards new law. Of course, the laws passed by the deputies must be new. It's clear that where there is the old laws must be abolished. This is a criticism put forward by Mirza Jalil and Iranian constitutional revolution. Mullah Nasreddin tried to address the class issues by driving attention to the inequality between the rich and the poor, the landlord and the laborer. Different issues are Mullah Nasreddin's cartoons showing landlord and laborer have tried to show inequality and power relations. From the first issue, Mullah Nasreddin reflected the economic and political reasons that forced the people to participate in the revolution in Iran, and describes Iran as a country of peasants. According to the magazine, there are 23 sultans in Azerbaijan. They had taken the land from the peasants and they were starving. So they had to go after bread to Russia. In Iran, the peasants were sold together with the land. They worked from morning to night, and the magazine is with the exploited peasants. One of the most important topics covered in Mullah Nasreddin magazine is freedom. In different issues of the magazine, the society's silence against all kinds of injustice and oppression has been shown to be the greatest obstacle to progress. Mullah Nasreddin humorously criticizes the misunderstanding of the concept of freedom. According to magazine, both rulers and mass members of society do not know the meaning of freedom, or prefer to interpret it according to their own interest. While Mullah Nasreddin magazine deals with the different social and political issues such as women's rights, superstitions, modern education, and new laws, it criticizes the dominant religious understanding and clergy that hold Muslims back. Women's rights are among the issues in many issues of the magazine. Women's independence, education, and the headscarf issue were critically addressed, and various issues such as nikah, muta, or temporary marriage, siga, polygamy, child marriage, violence against women, and stoning were discussed. Magazine also tried to compare the situation of Muslim and European women with various cartoons on the occasion of International Women's Day. The magazine also tries to guide Muslim women by announcing the news of educated Muslim women's photos without hijab. In this article titled Women of the East, Mirza Jalil writes, when we first mentioned the subject of women in our magazine in 1907, the bazaars and shops were closed in Tbilisi. They took the respected Satan Bazari Muslims to the mosque and asked for answers. A pilgrim from Astara took our magazine from our 55 subscribers and sent it back to our office. They say, we don't need such magazines anymore. Now we have come to these days. In the world of consultation, both men and women are human beings. Neither man is the property of the woman, nor the woman is the property of the man. The chain of Islam can no longer afford to run under the feet of woman, he said. From the old Mullah Nasreddin greetings to free Eastern women, salute to those who showed them this path of freedom. And another topic covered by Mullah Nasreddin is education. One of the social issues in Mullah Nasreddin's magazine is old and new methods of education. Mullah Nasreddin argued that in a modern sense, the number of schools should be increased and a more modern level of education should be achieved. A group of Iranians were overwhelmed with grief when the Iranian-owned Ittihad school opened in Baku. Mullah Nasreddin called those who mourned for the opening of a school foolish. Where were those tears when the country of Iran needed foreign governments because of the ignorance of dishonorable judges, incompetent ministers, and ignorant clerics? Where were those tears when widows, orphans, and the poor ate the soil in Tabriz? Another important effect of Caucasian political South on the events in Iran was its contribution to the spread of radical political views such as socialism in Iran. There was no in-depth discussion of socialism in pre-revolutionary political texts in Iran. In addition to the limited nature of such studies in Iranian political literature and their readers in Iran's illiterate society, their authors have not done extensive theoretical work in this field, as they do not believe in an absolute commitment to socialism. The social democratic movement in Russia and Western Europe has deepened Iranians' knowledge of socialism. The first foundation of the creation and the dissemination of the socialist and Marxist discourse in Iran were laid only after the emergence of social democratic groups and parties. The first discourse of the left in Iran can be considered as a result of laying the foundations of socialism in the programs of the Fergay Teoman Aktan and the Democrat Party. By 1905, the workers' movement had started a revolutionary wave not only in Baku but also in Caucasus. Unlike the Russians, Georgians, and Armenians, Muslims in the region were less inclined to revolutionary activities. The Muslim community adhered to its own values and intellectual foundations and did not rejoice in revolutionary slogans. Such a situation prompted some Muslim socialists in Azerbaijan to take their colleagues out of inaction and organize them in unity. Thus, Himmet Muslim Social Democratic Group was formed for this purpose and started its activities. Efforts were made to gain significant influence among Muslims in the Caucasus, and a large number of Muslim workers, some of whom were Iranian, were soon formed in the organization. Following Himmet's example and in collaboration with its activities, a group of Iranian immigrants formed Iran's first social democratic organization, Teoman Aktan, to support workers in the Caucasus. In the second assembly, which started its activities on November 15, 1909, the Ittihad Party and the Democrat Party were influential in Iran's political arena as two important actors. The principles of socialism in the Democrat Party's program were more or less the same as those in the program of Fergay Teoman Aktan. But the importance of the Democrat Party is in the discussions it has made about socialism and Marxism in its organ, the New Iran newspaper, Iran No newspaper. The article published in Iran No newspaper analyzed the current issues of Iranian society mainly from a socialist perspective. In addition to the articles published in the Iran No on socialism, we can also refer to Rasulzadeh's treatise on the critique of the Party of Ittihad. Also, this treatise was written in the critique of the Ittihad Party. Much of it contains material on socialism. The publication of Iran No began on August 24, 1909, but its first issue was published on October 22, 1910 as the official organ of the Democrat Party of Iran. Amin Rasulzadeh was the editor of this newspaper. Its publication continued until its closure in December 1911. According to Edward Said, this newspaper brought the style of European journalism to Iran. The Iran No was the dream of building a new Iran. According to Rasulzadeh, the futures of new Iran are as follows. Their homeland Iran, since it is a part of the world, is naturally subject to the general trend of the world and is doomed to the necessities of the law evolutions. We will follow the path taken by the civilized nations of the world. The tyranny of Iran ended its life without any general difference from the tyranny of other states, and the bloody revolution of recent years stabilized constitutionalism. The rule of one class is becoming national sovereignty. The paternal rights of kings are beyond the control of the nobility of the country and the nobility of the government and the royal family, and should include the nation. Of course, in the course of its constitution, Iran will go through the same steps that other nations have gone through. Rasulzadeh discusses different social and political issues in Iran on newspaper. The importance of the rule of law and freedom of press are among the issues he touched upon. In the article titled "Our Mission" in the first issue of Iran No, he writes, Iran No has just stepped into the world. Its first act will be to lead the development of the press. The press is the medicine for troubles of the country. Newspapers have destroyed and are destroying the homeland of oppression. The newspaper is always on the alert. It cannot allow the development of the country to be hindered. In this article titled Under What Conditions Will Parliament Be Opened, the need for renewal of the peoples of the East was underlined. Rasulzadeh also discusses the issue of execution in Iran to describe the concept of rule of law. According to him, the philosophy of punishment is separate from the philosophy of grievance. But according to him, we are so dependent on this persecution that we cannot distinguish punishment from grievance. The Iranian people still have not understood this, that the reason for the persecution is not individuals, but the current form of government. We should know that this old tyranny is the cause of all troubles and oppression, and one of its main principles is the death penalty. Another important work of Rasulzadeh is the critique of the party of İtidaliyun. The aristocracy which dominated the land, its subject, according to Rasulzadeh, pursued their goals under the guise of constitutionalism and found their fulfillment in the party of İtidaliyun. In their one-page program, the İtidaliyun limited themselves to the generalities of freedom and progress, and this was an opportunity for the Democrats to challenge it. And Rasulzadeh wrote a detailed treatise criticizing the İtidaliyun or the İçtimaiyun İtidaliyun. Also, this treatise is written in critique of İtidaliyun party must have. It contains material on socialism. Rasulzadeh then criticized the provisions of the İtidaliyun ideology and says İtidaliyun do not recognize anyone qualified as Iranian other than Iranian Muslims. This is the view of our socialists on the question of nations. How can a conscientious party assume that all of Iran is Muslim and draw the line at other nations, no matter how small? Political theories are not the principles of religion in which someone apostates and leaves Islam. The dispute between tyranny and constitution is a legal dispute, and in law, all the children of Iran are partners regardless of race or religion. And it is a right that land of Iran itself, this clean water and soil, benefits them like a kind mother. Rasulzadeh considers İçtimaiyun İtidaliyun as a deception of the Iranian elite that puts two opposing beliefs together. Socialists support Marx and the theory of evolution. He writes, all kinds of socialists have in common that capitalism must be replaced by socialism. Some of them want to achieve it through evolution and others through revolution. and then asks, do our moderates fight the capitalists and want to hand over power to the Iranian proletariat, or do they want to take Iranian women out from under the black chador and sit in the seats of the National Assembly? Are they satisfied with the confiscation of personal land and distribution among farmers, or with the enactment of government laws by the workers of this country? Rasulzadeh further criticized moderates is the main identity and intrinsic meaning of conservatives, which in France is called conservative. The word socialist is also a translation of socialism. So if we return the names of these false heroes of the Iranian political arena to France, it will be a combination that makes all Western politicians laugh or wonder. Thank you. And I think I should stop here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aktan. I'm going to invite Dr. Balaghi to join us.
Thank you so much for that really erudite and informative discussion. We have quite a few questions from the audience, but we have only a limited amount of time. So let's get started. One audience member asked, were any of these publications subject to censorship?
And as I discussed, Molana Setim was censored in the Caucasus because of its criticism of Ottoman Sultan, and also banned from entering to Iran. And also there was a censorship in the Russia, with some of well-known publications and magazine banned. For example, Akinci, the first magazine of Azerbaijani society, was banned by Russian government because of its criticism of Akinci to the war.
Thank you. So another question we have is, Akhundzadeh was so advanced for that period. How did the clergy react to his views and his ideas of the separation of religion and politics?
Not just Akhundzadeh, but most of intellectuals in that period were under pressure of clergy in the Caucasus and also in Iran. And for example, we know the story of Mirza Yusifbeyli, who were under pressure of clergy. And also we know that in some cases, supporters of religious circles in Azerbaijan harassed Jalil Mohammad Gholizadeh and other writers of magazine. Also, Sabir had to flee from his city to other cities, and we know about the harassment of clergies on Mirza Hassan Rushdie. For example, he came to Iran to open Rushdie school, and he had to flee to Qom from Tabriz.
Thank you. Could you talk about the influence of the Qajar court in the Caucasus during this period?
Qajar court had influence on the Caucasus region because religion and Farsi language was one of, according to Sevichowski, was one of instruments that Qajar court tried to put its and exercise its power to the Caucasus region. And before the age of nationalism and Qajar's Qajar was very active in Caucasus because the Russia needed Qajar court to have its support with solving its problem with Ottoman Empire.
One audience member asks about if there were any female writers at this time.
There were many female writers such as Hamida Khan Javanshir, wife of Jalil Mohammad Gholizadeh. Also, we know about Mastav, poets such as Banu Natawan in Caucasus region, which was very active in supporting philanthropist activities in the region.
That's interesting. We have a couple of questions about Babism and Baha'ism and generally the influence on social movements in this region and also their relationship with some of the specific writers that you talked about.
As I said, Mirza Kazım Bey was very active in focusing on Babis movement because he saw that the Babis movement was not a religious movement, but it has it had political intentions and was a form of organizing political movements in Qajar and other Muslim societies.
We have several questions that focus on socialism and Marxism in this period. One in particular asks, which Azerbaijani Iranian thinkers would you say influenced socialism in Iran the most?
In Iran, most of Iranian socialists had connection with Himmet party, Heydar Khan Amoğlu. We can talk about Heydar Khan Amoğlu and also Narimanov, because Narimanov had connection with Iran, and he translated the first program of İçtimai Yönami and the socialist parties into Persian. Also, we can talk about Peshawari and most of founders of Iranian Communist Party in Azerbaijan belong to were Qajar subjects.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, but several of the audience members wrote in the Q&A to thank you for your presentation, and I join them also thanking you and all the organizers of today's event.
Thank you. I should express my thanks to Farhang Foundation for preparing this productive environment for discussing about the story of Caucasus and Qajar period. Thank you.
Thank you again to Dr. Aktan for joining us today and for this incredible presentation. As Dr. Balaghi mentioned, we do have a lot of questions and we will share them with Dr. Aktan, and he can hopefully answer each of the questions personally later via email. Special thanks to Dr. Shiva Balaghi for moderating today's Q&A session. As always, please visit farhang.org for our latest upcoming events, talks, and programs. And if you are in the Southern California region this March, we look forward to welcoming you to our 13th annual celebration of Nowruz on March 20th, which will be back on the beautiful campus of UCLA for a day-long free celebration of the Iranian New Year. We thank you all for joining us from across the globe today for today's talk, and we look forward to welcoming you again next time. Until then, we bid you farewell. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.